favorite part of the brain, which is the limbic system. The reason for this is because without the limbic system, we wouldn't be able to love our family, our romantic partners, our kids. We wouldn't be able to express that feeling that we feel when we see them, when we see a picture of them, when we hear their voice, when we hug them. And that's amazing. I feel like it's a big part of who we are as humans when we interact with each other, to express that feeling that we feel for each other. I love the limbic system because without the limbic, we wouldn't be able to love. We literally wouldn't love without the limbic system. And in more detail, basically within the temporal lobe, might be a temporal lobe, but you can love forever with it. The amygdala is responsible for the emotional processing. And more importantly, the hypothalamus, which feeds information to the amygdala for that emotional processing, and also releases very important hormones that are associated with love and closeness. Oxytocin and vasopressin. We'll get into there's two of them, which they affect males and females a little bit differently. Vasopressin also is antidiuretic hormone. So with they've done fMRIs on the brain and kind of contrasted, and were able to find once you progress, from liking a romantic partner to loving them, that the areas that you see here in the red, and here, so the insula here, and then in the anterior cingulate cortex, as well as the basal ganglia, they show more activity, and so like when viewing them, the areas of the brain were lighting up more on the fMRI, and then the activity of the oxytocin and vasopressin were increased in that area, whereas the areas in the blue, the right prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate gyrus, and the right prefrontal cortex, just in a different view, showed less activity. So the insula and the striatum are both responsible from progressing sexual desire to love. So it just basically becomes habit forming. So especially for the striatum, which is also associated with drug addiction, basically that love becomes a habit that is just reinforced as the sexual desire is rewarded, like the way that drugs kind of reinforce that behavior when the dopamine is released. So some of the hormones I talked about earlier, oxytocin and vasopressin. So for females, the receptors are expressed more for oxytocin. whereas vasopressin receptors are expressed more in male, which kind of makes sense, when society and stereotypically we associate with women being more loving and expressing that a little bit differently, which this potentially could point to that being the reason. They're both sexually dimorphic pituitary hormones, as I kind of touched on earlier, in the hypothalamus. And oxytocin enhances bonding, and it's also associated with immobility without fear, which can have a couple meanings. I mean, it's kind of like if you ever had that feeling of love and you can kind of almost do anything and kind of feel invincible. I kind of associate oxytocin with that